what do you say yes to and what do you say no to? And whom do you say yes to and whom do you say no to? Are your yeses to other people no's to yourself and the people that you love and care about? Who is your priority? Because when we sometimes guilt ourselves into, oh, I'm just people pleasing, I don't even want you to think about it that way. Just ask yourself, if I say this yes, is it a no to me? Hey, Mama, you're listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast, episode number 65. Today on the podcast, I want to talk about overwhelm in motherhood. And this is going to be a short and sweet episode because I am still like scratchy voiced and I'm trying to protect my voice. Actually, last week, my podcast producer, Cassidy, and I were recording a new intro and outro for the podcast, which she tells me is not going to be on this episode, but it's coming. And it was so funny. She's very serious about her work. And she was literally so she told me that I'm not allowed to, well, not allowed to, but she highly discouraged me from clearing my voice. And she told me that I had to hum if I wanted to clear my voice. And it was so hard. It was so funny. But we got the work done. I'm still trying to just really rest my throat. And I have had all my coaching calls this week. And I want to practice some self-care and be kind to my body and listen to it because I don't know what it is that happened after I had this cold. But it's a lot. Today, I wanted to talk about overwhelm in motherhood. And it's actually from a coaching call I had with one of my clients today. I realized that sometimes we go through these seasons in our working motherhood that can seem very exhausting and daunting and all the things. And sometimes we just don't know how to navigate them. So I kind of wanted to share some of the thoughts that came up for me after we recorded this episode. And that was the ideas regarding what are the thoughts that are happening when we feel overwhelmed, and what are our thoughts about the situations that we're going through, and how do we reassure ourselves and create that balance for ourselves? How do we tell ourselves that we're going to be okay, and how do we navigate that? So one of the things I wanted to kind of go through as a refresher is reminding us about, and I covered this in the Burnout episode, reminding us about stress and stressors and what the difference is. And so stress is the neurophysiological response to stressors. And so stressors can be your job, your motherhood, your marriage, your relationships. Those can be the reasons, the stressors. And then the response that you have in your body is the stress. And if it goes unchecked and we don't complete our stress cycles, we remain in fight or flight for so long that it becomes just our ultimate existence. And so what happens is then we get into burnout, we have compassion fatigue. And in order for us to see it before we get there, I think it's important for us to notice when overwhelm comes up in our motherhood and in our work life, and how to just kind of pay attention to that. Hi there, I'm Shira Bergbauer, and I'm passionate about supporting working moms. I'm a life coach, wife, mom, and nurse anesthetist. On this podcast, I teach you the tried and true secrets to achieving work-motherhood balance. Parenting, relationships, health, self-care, and personal growth are all topics we discuss on this podcast. Nothing is off limits. Think of this as your one-stop show for happy hour with a mama friend mixed with life school. Pull up a seat, get cozy, and get ready to be empowered while you learn. Welcome to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. The first thing is, when you think about it, there's a big difference between dealing with your stress and dealing with the things that cause you stress. And so if you are unfamiliar with how to deal with your stress, I highly, highly recommend you go back to that episode on burnout. We will link it in the show notes so you can go back to it and kind of listen to it from the perspective of how do you deal with stress, like the actual stress, like how do you complete your stress cycles, and how do you reassure, basically reset your parasympathetic nervous system so it can do its job and you can kind of get out of fight or flight that you've been in that is causing you, to feel that emotion and navigate that. And so if you want to go listen to that episode before you listen to this, I say do it. That is the burnout episode, and it is episode number 19. It's from April of 2021, interestingly. And it just talks about burnout and compassion fatigue. So highly recommend that episode just if you've never understood how to deal with your stress cycles. And I will just give you a too long didn't read version of it. But the number one way to complete your stress cycle is through movement, and then mindfulness and just being in the present moment. So go check out that episode and then come back and listen to this one. So that is how you deal with your stress. And then the second part is dealing with your stressors. So stressors such as all the things you have to do for your job, all the things that your kids need from you, your spouse or partner needs from you, all the things that you want to be doing, like you have a long to-do list. Speaking of to-do lists, I am not a big to-do list person. And I actually shared in an episode about time management for moms, one of the ways I take care of the things that I need to be doing is through using the Eisenhower matrix and managing that matrix so that I know the things that I can do now that are urgent, the things that I can delegate, the things that I need to save for later, and the things that I need to just never do and don't worry about doing it. So that episode is episode 18, right before the time management episode. And in that episode, I teach you some methods in which you can understand how to clear the clutter and focus on what matters, and just the approach that I use for that. I also teach in that episode about the Thieves of productivity, which is one of the things that I kind of want to touch on today as part of overwhelm and just having all these stressors in motherhood. One of the things to think about is when you have the thought that I'm overwhelmed, or when you actually feel the stress response in your body, to notice the thoughts that come up. So one of the thoughts that may come up is I don't have enough time. The other thought is there's too much to get done and I have too many commitments, or I have too many things to do. One thing that I see, especially in working moms who are high-achieving women, is that we pack our lives with so much activity and so much action, and we shoot ourselves into all these things that we're doing. So we're like, I should also attend all these meetings. I should also volunteer for my kids' class. I should also, bring the potluck to work and all of these things. And we often don't pause to just ask ourselves, is it necessary? And one of the biggest thoughts that I have for myself, when I start shooting myself about I should do X, Y, and Z, I always try to ask myself, is it true? And is that thought serving me? And do I want to keep that thought? And so I'm going to just do a quick recap on the Thieves of Productivity, because I'm going to touch on a little bit about saying yes and no. So I wanted to touch on that. So the 4 Thieves of Productivity is a concept that I learned from James Clear in his book. Actually, was it from James Clear? Now I'm all getting the books mixed up. I want to say it was either from the book The One Thing or from James Clear. Yes, it was from The One Thing. I apologize. And in The One Thing, I talked about how you start each day by asking yourself, what is the one thing I can do today for my job or for my parenting or for my marriage, such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or even unnecessary. And that just kind of gives you direction, because you will do more productive work and your personal life will be more rewarding because you have clarity on your purpose. And what I like to think about as the one thing is what is the one thing that I need to do to move the needle in my life, in my work life, in my marriage, in my parenting. So the 4 Thieves of Productivity are the inability to say no, fear of chaos, poor health habits, and an environment that doesn't support your goals. So the reason I really wanted to touch on overwhelm today is because one of the biggest things that I see in a lot of my coaching clients, and even in myself sometimes, is the inability to say no. And I was trying to think of this quote today when I was on the coaching call, and it just wouldn't come to my head, but I have it written down now so I can say it to you. And it's a quote by Seth Godin. And I quote Seth quite a bit. He's a marketing master. And he says, you can say no with respect. You can say no promptly, and you can say no with a lead to someone who might say yes. But just saying yes because you can't bear the short-term pain of saying no is not going to help you do the work. And so if you think about when we are bombarded with expectations from our jobs and the people that we work with and our spouses and our kids, and we are constantly saying yes to other people, one thing I really, really recommend that you think about is, when do your yeses to other people turn into no's to yourself? Or, for example, when you are faced with a decision between choosing something that your job expects of you, when is that yes actually saying no to your own family, to your own partner, to yourself? So I'll give you an example. Let's say somebody asks you if you can stay late from work to finish something, and you really have this activity that you want your kid to take your kid to, and it means a lot. Let's say they have a dance recital, or you have parent-teacher conference, and you really had made plans and you were excited about joining them, or you're going to have dinner with your husband. You feel bad because people at work are swamped, and you're like, well, I would feel like such a bad person if I don't say yes, so I say yes to them. And what we forget is that when you say that yes, you have said no to the other thing, right? So if you say yes to staying late after work, you're saying no to, your kids' activity or the dinner that you had with your husband. And sometimes that yes is more important than the no that you're saying to your partner or to your kid, and that's okay. But what I highly recommend is that you notice when that yes to the other person and it's a no to you or your family or your partner or what's important to you, is it going to yield a net positive result, or is it going to yield a neutral result, or is it going to yield a net negative result? So, for example, say you say yes to the extra work at work, and then you say no to going to your child's parent-teacher conference. Most likely it's going to yield a net negative result because you will not get to engage with your kid's teacher. You won't get to know what's happening in your kid's life, and there will be no room for repairing that, missed event. Or it could be that you say no because maybe your kid's been having an easy year and you ask your husband to go, and he goes and everything's going okay, and maybe he writes down some notes and you get to stay at work and there's a big case happening, and the person who you helped is they were able to do something, or they weren't feeling well and you were able to get them out. And so the net result maybe is a positive result because everything, or a net neutral where everything turned out okay with your kid and everything turned out okay at work. But just being able to notice when are those yeses serving you? When are those yes to other people serving you, and when are they not? So another example I was thinking of is when somebody asks you to do something and you just you don't have the capacity to do it, but you say yes because you don't want to disappoint them. One of the things we forget is to then turn inward and ask ourselves, then did I disappoint myself? Because if I was so worried about disappointing this person, did I even check in with myself to understand how this event that I'm adding to my calendar, adding to my list of activities, is it going to be a disappointment to myself when I can't complete the things that I had planned on doing? So maybe I had a project that I wanted to do, or maybe I was supposed to have lunch with my sister, or maybe I was supposed to, go do muffins with mom for Mother's Day with my kid at school, and I say yes to them. Am I then disappointing myself? And one interesting thing that my client said to me was, when you think about when you say no to people, is it easier for you to say no to your own family? Is it easier for you to say no to your spouse rather than saying no to like your job or expecting like family expectations for like extended family? Is it easier for you to say no to the people that are closest to you? And I think, and this is just my personal opinion, the reason it may sometimes seem easier to say no to those who are closest to us, who are so like patient with us and loving to us, is because we are so aware of their ability to give us grace. Like they're obviously going to like still love us unconditionally, especially our kids, right? Like our kids have this capacity to recover from like some of our no's. And we tell ourselves a story that if I say no, maybe to somebody at work, like they'll be disappointed and maybe they won't ask me next time. And remember, like all of us as humans, like we want to be loved and we want to belong. And so when we sense that if we say no, that belonging is threatened, that being loved is threatened, it's so much easier to say yes to those other people outside than it is to say, and it's harder for us to say no to them because, man, I mean, they're like perceivably so much at stake when we say no to them. Like it's almost like the being voted off the proverbial island. And, I talk about this on the podcast a lot where it's like the way we existed as, our ancestors existed, like you had to kind of be cool with everybody in the community because otherwise, like if you pissed off the medicine woman or you pissed off her friend and then you got bit by a snake, you would not get the potions to heal your snake bite and you could die. So like it was a survival mechanism for us to have that belonging. And what we just sometimes don't realize is we have to have our own backs. Like we have to check in with ourselves. And so when we realize like, oh, of course it's easier for me to say, yes to that person and say no to myself because I love me and I'll forgive myself. But we forget like, is that even like worth having other people's approval and saying no to ourselves? And so I just wanted to kind of go through some of these thoughts to just kind of, just check in and kind of maybe think about some thought models that come with these thoughts, right? So when you think like, I don't have enough time, there is a big difference between the thought that I don't have enough time and I have the time that I need to accomplish the things that I have to accomplish. When you believe I don't have enough time, it's almost a sense of resignation and there is not motivation to troubleshoot for what's available to fix those situations. So like one of the things my client and I discussed today was the possibility of many workplaces have this program called Bright Horizons. And our institutions, like my institution, gives us 100 hours a year to use towards childcare. And what we talked about was maybe when you have like all these things to do, maybe just having a mother's helper type situation of a babysitter come in and like take care of the kids for a couple of hours so you can catch up on stuff. And when we are in the belief and in resignation, we are not willing to consider all those options. And it's not because we don't want to, it's because our brain doesn't show us that. And for me, that's one of the biggest values of coaching is to help my clients see the crevices of their own brain that they may not be willing to explore because I show up with a flashlight and I'm like, look in that little corner over there. There's this option, like, can we explore it? The second thought, when you think there's too much to get done and you just also get in that resignation or you get in frustration, it's harder to motivate yourself to just like, piece by piece. Like we have a Swahili saying that says like little by little fills the pot. And so when we, for example, and I forget if it's how to eat an elephant, but like how do you eat an elephant? You eat it piece by piece. Like you don't put the whole thing in your mouth, right? So when we are more like aware of and reframing that instead of like there's too much to be done into I have a lot to do, but I will do what I can in the amount that I have available, then it's like we give ourselves permission to just take care of what we can and start. Because the other thing, sometimes we get into this perfection paralysis and we don't even begin because we're like, it's too much and I can't do it all, so I'm just not going to do any of it. The third thing is the idea, and sometimes my clients will say this to me, like as if they're announcing the news. They're like, I have too many commitments. And I always challenge them because when you say I have too many commitments, it's a passive thought. It's like somebody gave you all these commitments and you have to do them. and forgetting that you actually decided to do all those things. And so the reason why that thought doesn't serve my clients is because then they feel like they're out of, like, they can't control the situation. It's out of their control. And what I offer them is I have a lot of commitments instead of I have too many commitments, or, I have too much to get done, because then we can be like, okay, I have a lot of commitments. So now I want to prioritize which ones are the most important ones. Which ones are like I have to do right now? And it goes back to the needle moving activities. It's like when you look at your calendar, what is the one thing that you have to get done in order to keep the needle moving? So, for example, for me, sometimes, like days like this, I have procrastinated on recording the podcast, and I have all these things, and I have content that I want to write, and I have to ask myself, like, what is the one thing I need to do today to keep the needle moving? And so I think about it in this terms of what is the most value creating activity I can do in this time frame. And so like today I was trying to like create content for Instagram and Facebook, and also like I had planned this podcast episode, and the podcast episode I had planned was actually, comically enough, it was about overwhelm. I am not even exaggerating, and I make my calendar well ahead of time. But I just like wasn't like ready to do it, and then I had this coaching call today, and I'm like, thank you, universe, for sending me like more like to put in the podcast, especially because I was I hadn't really like created the show notes for it, and I hadn't really like, and I sometimes get in that like it needs to be like packed and with information. And so when that coaching call happened today, like literally 2 hours ago, I was like, oh, this is a needle moving activity that I need to create this podcast to have this out to my people that listen to the podcast, because it's going to reach more people and it's going to create value in the world that they can use the information I share with them to help themselves. So as a business person, like that was my needle moving activity for the day, like to create value in the world. And I talked about this in the last episode, to create value in the world so that maybe people who can't work with me one-on-one, or people who just like found me on podcasts, like when they listen to this podcast, they can get the value that I want to contribute into the world. And so for me, I had to choose this over creating content for Facebook, writing copy, and all of that. So that is why it's so important for you to just like filter through, like have a priority list. Even if you're a to-do list kind of person, just write all the things down and then check on that list. Like if I do A, B will be easier. If I do B, C will be easier. And sometimes it's just like the willingness to look at all those things that we want to do and ask ourselves, like, which one of these, if I do, will make everything else much easier. So that is the one thing, like asking yourself, like, if I do this thing today, everything else will be easier or even unnecessary. So when I think about, like, for me, going back to the example of writing content, creating this podcast and having just like maybe the outline of the podcast, I can create content for social based on that outline. So it actually just makes everything easier if I choose to do that. And so just like observe for yourself when you are feeling like I don't have enough time and you're just feeling overwhelmed, just give yourself permission to do one thing at a time. The other thing that I think is important for us to realize is there will be times when our jobs and our lives overlap. And in fact, recently somebody said to me that they had been told by somebody that working motherhood just means that everything you do, you just do it mediocre. And I choose to disagree with this because I believe that if we are intentional and we counterbalance our working motherhood, so what counterbalance means is sometimes the scales tip, sometimes work is higher, and, motherhood is lower, or the scales tip in the other direction. When we counterbalance that, we can do those things and do them really well. I remember when I was in high school, we had this guy that was like a motivational speaker, and he said something, and I don't even know who to attribute this quote to, but he was like, whatever you do, do it well. Even if you're a street sweeper, if you sweep the streets so well, you will live the legacy of there once lived a great street sweeper. And so the way I understood it is like when I am doing the thing that is my focus for that time frame, I do it well. And that means that I'm not trying to do both things at once. So I'm not trying to, for example, manage my business, take care of my kid at the same exact time. myself would much rather, if I had an hour, split it in 30 and 30, give my child 30 minutes of my undivided attention and give this activity 30 minutes of my undivided attention, then try to do both at the same time. And for me, that's why like I argue with that mindset that like working motherhood just means that like you just do both and you just do the mediocre. And it's actually, I've heard it from other people before. Like there are people that walk around sharing this mentality and maybe it works for them. I just believe that like we are made for more. And my legacy in this world is not going to have like been mediocre at working or at motherhood. There will be at some point where I will learn how to counterbalance the two, and I will bring all the moms along with me on that journey so that we can all stake that claim. So the other thing, I talked about as far as the thieves of productivity is the fear of chaos. When we are like so afraid of mess. And I know for many of my clients, and me included, because this is a struggle that I have, we may get triggered by mess. So if things aren't where they need to be, we may just like almost get into like analysis by paralysis, like paralysis by analysis. Like we can't move until like all the things are where they need to be. And it's okay to question that sometimes. Like, okay, I know I'm feeling flustered that there's clothes on the floor and all of these things are happening, but like, is that preventing me from being productive because I want to do all the things at the same time? And then poor sleep habits. This one, like I get flack from people when I say this, and I just believe that sleep is the solution to many problems, including but not limited to stress. And if you're not getting enough rest, I just offer you to start checking in with yourself. What are the reasons you're not getting enough rest? Because they're all figure outable for the most part. Unless you have like some sort of like neurological disorder, all sleep issues are figure outable. Sometimes like I'll have conversations with my clients and we will literally do an inventory of their time because they're like, well, I got in bed at 9, but I couldn't sleep until 11 now. I'm like, what were you doing the entire time? Oh, I was just scrolling Facebook. And I'm like, there it is. And so we start working with that. So just notice your own sleep habits and understand that when that aspect of your life is out of balance, it may be very difficult to navigate the overwhelm. And then the environment that doesn't support your goals, how you can factor for this is just be with people who support for your goals and be sure to ask for support when you feel like you need it. And I'm actually going to say, ask for support anyway, even when you don't think you need it. Ask for support because somebody is going to offer it to you and you might think you don't need it, but it's so freeing to have somebody pick up a task, even if it's like saying, hey, yeah, I do need help picking up, the dry cleaning, or I do need help, like, grandma, could you come watch the kids for a couple of hours? Just like those little tweaks can help us like really move forward and navigate that overwhelm. The last thing I wanted to say is sometimes we have an attachment to form, and this is a concept I learned from my coach. And it's like we believe there's a singular way of doing something, and that's the only way. So it's like I believe that, for example, I have to do like these activities a certain way every time, or I have to show up for these activities every time, like my kids' activities and all of that. And we just get addicted to the form that we forget. Like there will be times when our job will ask of us to be there and we can't be in two places at once. Right? So there is not a singular way of doing things. And if we can be willing to just explore the idea that maybe there's a different way of doing something rather than the way we've been used to doing it before, we may actually discover we like the new way. And so letting go of that like need to be attached to the form in which we had like idealized the way life would come and being in all or nothing thinking, like it may serve us better if we are willing to just look at that. So that is all I have, Mama, for today. And I hope that you picked up a couple of lessons. Most importantly of it, I think the thing that I want you to remember from this podcast is, what do you say yes to and what do you say no to? And whom do you say yes to and whom do you say no to? Are your yeses to other people no's to yourself and the people that you love and care about? Who is your priority? Because when we sometimes guilt ourselves into, oh, I'm just people pleasing, I don't even want you to think about it that way. Just ask yourself, if I say this yes, is it a no to me? Is it a no to my family? And what matters more? And then can I evaluate what is the net negative? Is it net positive or net neutral? Can I live with that decision? And just notice for yourself what comes up when you are really clean about how you're saying yes and how you're saying no. And I will bet you're going to have a lot less overwhelm if you just filter your yeses and your nos. And if you're willing to have uncomfortable conversations with people when you say no. Oh, and before I forget, you don't have to over-explain your no's. You can just be like, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. Because sometimes we think we have to follow it with, because I have da-da-da-da-da-da to do. You don't have to do that. You can just keep an open mind and say a no from a clean place and just say, I'm sorry, I'm not able to do that. Maybe somebody else can say, point them to somebody else who might say yes. Also, it's okay because when somebody comes to ask us to do something, even unconsciously, they know there's a 50% chance they'll get a yes and there's a 50% chance they'll get a no. If somebody comes to you with the expectation that when they ask something and it's 100% guaranteed you'll say yes, then that's on them. That's on them to question why they even ask in the first place if they're so certain of the response. So that is all I have for today. And if you're struggling with overwhelm and time management and just trying to navigate all your counterbalancing of your work and your motherhood and just feeling like you can't catch a break, you have all these thoughts, and maybe even this podcast gave you maybe some food for thought, like, oh, I actually didn't pay attention to that. This is the thought I was thinking, and you want to explore it deeper. Opportunities to work with me one-on-one are available. Just go to stethoscopestoswaddles.com/consultation or send me a DM on social media that we can set up a one-on-one consult and see if we're a good fit for working together in my coaching program. So I hope you enjoyed this podcast episode. I hope you learned something. Also, please feel free to share this podcast with a friend, a neighbor, another mama who may be struggling. The more people that we get on the airwaves, the more people learn about the podcast, the better for all of us working moms. So thank you for your support and have a great week. All right, bye now. I'm Shira Berg-Bauer, and you've been listening to the Stethoscopes to Swaddles podcast. New episodes of the podcast are out every Monday. These episodes are produced by me, Shira Berg-Bauer, and edited by Cassidy Mitchell. You can contact the show by emailing hello@anesthesiamom.com. To submit a question, go to www.stethoscopestoswaddles.com and fill out the contact form. You're doing a great job, Mama. I'll see you next week. Bye now.